So we really want to know what the soul is, or we started ambiguating the question, or what the soul is for the Jewish tradition, or for some parts of the Jewish tradition, or for philosophical tradition. Yesterday, one of the kind of questions people like asking me is, okay, but what do normal Jews believe? Or what do they think? And I usually answer that normal people don't think, so that's a category error question. Or another nicer way of saying it, that normal people think certain basic, or say certain basic thoughts, but those thoughts usually, when you start teasing them out, at least lead to contradictory results, which means that there's no coherent system behind it. If you force them to choose, they might choose one way or the other, and that might not be a good thing, or yes, be a good thing, depending on how much you like Socrates, or how much you think how they think the truth really works. Yeah, you might just say, well, okay, so therefore we'll just believe halfway is a lot of things. That's also one way. But the more importantly to us is that we're not really interested in what normal people believe. So that's only one. There's another way of talking about this, which is somewhat more important, at least definitely for people like Rav Sadigan and the Rambam, this tradition that we try to teach, sort of. And these two things connect. If we learn in there's a Moed and Vichem class, which we try to go into this and exactly read the words and see what they say. But basically, there is something which people, we could say something like this. There's some things which people, and that's how the Rambam will tell you to, because he likes to universalize even that and say that people need to believe, right? Or we could say there are certain things in the Sadigon, slightly more Jewish way of saying it. We would say there are some things that we believe, or that Jewish people believe, because it was told to them by tradition, by what he calls, remember, edut, witness, by testimony, right? So some things we know by testimony, of which is supposed to, well, there's a chain of testimony, but it's supposed to go back to prophecy. But that's some things we know. In other words, we could say in the Greek sense, where there's opinions we have due to testimony, because we cannot have knowledge to testimony, not episteme. You cannot have the testimony, but you can have opinion, right? That's definitely a basic thought that Rav Sadia and everyone else assumes. There's no way to have true knowledge, justify true belief, or whatever exactly that is, because one of the conditions of that is that it be justified. That's one of the conditions that nobody wants.
Relationship between the knower and the known?
Yeah, or at least it has to be justified. That's the word that you get in English usually when you read the Theaetetus and things like that. And the Sadia that explicitly has this definition of knowledge. That you know the truth and you know that it's such. In other words, that you know there must be such, which basically means knowing proofs. Well, self-evidence is yeah, you can use that.
That's honorific term.
No, that's a whole different game to play. We're not the Shanim don't have these kind of games in general. That's why one of the things that's okay. Wait. Wait. The point is, yeah. No, we're jumping concepts. We have to be clear. For the Rishonim, meaning the Rishonim that at least say things that I understand, not the ones that just say a bunch of things that seem to contradict each other, and then we have to figure out if they mean anything. But the ones that do try to have a systematic exposition of things, they all assume that there are things that we believe due to tradition. And if you would ask the Rambam, he would say you should believe these things due to tradition. The Sadigon is slightly simpler, because he just says, and it's correct to do that, because of course there's some conditions for deciding which tradition is true, but after we have that, you will believe those things in the way of believing testimony, or in a doxa way, right? And then you have correct opinions. But you would not know that those things are true, right? Not know by yourself that are true. That's another way of saying it. Now, there's something that's a general way that he frames everything, and therefore he's like writing this book where he's going to both prove that these are the correct opinions, which is just to answer like for the apologetic reason, and also for the internal reason, which is to turn opinion into knowledge, or the way he frames it is to actualize potential knowledge, because for him opinion is a potential of knowledge, which I'm not sure where exactly that comes from, but maybe last week I said I don't remember. But point is, that's a level of knowledge that we impossible to get from listening to other people. Now there's something more interesting here going on, though. This is very simplistic, and generally, if you read the Sadigon's Akdama, this is the simplistic the simple framework that you seem to get, and you end up with this like story of two sources of truth, so to speak. Although not two kinds of truth, not two kinds of knowledge, very important, right? Again, these two sources collapse really into one, and metaphysically there's no two sources of truth. In other words, there's no two kinds of knowledge. There isn't human knowledge and divine knowledge for him. There's only human knowledge. Divine knowledge in the sense of what God knows there is, but people never have divine knowledge, and he's very explicit about this. You should listen to my Hebrew class that I did on Tuesday about this in the Rambam. But point being that there is no self-evident. There are self-evident things, which are the what he calls the source, part of the source. An intellectual source would be some things that are somewhat self-evident, like that a whole is greater than its parts and so on. Or, might call them tautological, but he includes more things than that and that. So he does think that there's some things that we know directly, but those are not the interesting things. Those would be like basic rules of thought, if anything. Or sometimes moral rules, like you should be good, which is a rule that it's very hard to go beyond that. So you have that as an axiom, and he thinks that you have some sort of direct apprehension of it in your intellect, but doesn't tell you what is good, right? Not really, for the most part. Point being, so this is the main point being that in the basic, simple story, there's things that we know. There's only one kind of things. That's like something that this is important, right? There's only one kind of knowledge, or only one kind of truth, or only one kind of one world, really, and that is things known by like we said, three sources of truth. The first three sources, which are seeing, senses, and intellectual senses, sort of like these things that we just mentioned, and then a deduction or things that you build up based on that, and they get you very far because from some basic principles we can derive almost anything or a lot of things. But that's all kind of knowledge there is, and that includes prophecy. So prophecy is some kind of knowledge that there's not a different kind of knowledge. Just that for example, it's some kind of proof. That's how he frames prophecy, and he framed miracles. That's where very important for him that miracles should be a kind of proof, and he needs to move around a whole bunch of assumptions for that to work. But the fact that, for example, a prophet speaks to God is something that needs to be proven to him in the way of the senses and the intellect, in the same way anything else needs to be proven. And that's why we have miracles to prove for the prophet that he's having prophecy, and that's why there's some apparitions. That's why the prophet sees actually things, because otherwise there would be no way of him knowing that he's prophesizing. So prophecy is also not something that really goes beyond the basic human way of knowing. It's just, some sort of... it's a good question if the prophet himself has knowledge, because he might just believe that what God told him. I never know the answer to this question for people like Sadigan. For the Rambam, I know the answer, which is that prophecy is, and the real prophecy is just knowledge.
Right.
But for the Sadigan, it's not like that. And it seems to me that the prophet himself would not have knowledge in the epistemic sense.
The content of prophecy?
No, everything. You read whatever you read in the book is the content of prophecy. In other words, God came to Moshe and told him, I am God, and I am like this, and I am like that, and the soul is like this, and so like that. Everything you find in the Tanakh is prophecy, and they're facts about the world, and facts about morals, and facts about everything. Sometimes, like we discussed, there are some arbitrary things, like certain mitzvahs, which don't have any logic behind them. They're just God's testing your obedience or whatever. But that's still just a fact that God said that. There's no.
Proof is just to demonstrate.
You would get a second-hand proof, in the sense that you get proof that God is speaking to you, not that the things that He tells you are true.
That be proven? What's the system?
By miracles, basically by miracles, by things that we know that only God can do. So if there are things that only God can do, i.e. miracles, which is very important, because therefore he has to deny that people could make miracles, unlike what any Hasidic Yidden believe, that Tzaddikim could make miracles, for example, because otherwise the proof doesn't work. Not only Hasidic Yidden, there's different Rishonim that definitely believe that. He doesn't believe that because of this, and so on. I'm just giving you an example. But anyways, if we know that something only God can do, and we see it happening, so we know that this is God's action, and therefore we could believe that it's God speaking to you. And there's more. He also has the whole idea of Kuved Nivra, which is showing the prophet that God is speaking to him, and it's also sort of a miracle. And anyway, okay. And it's a very interesting question if the prophet himself has knowledge, or if he needs knowledge, because he definitely has certainty, but he doesn't have knowledge. Right. Because he doesn't know why it's true. That's a problem.
Opinions aren't measured in terms of your confidence in them.
Well, that's one of the measures, but it's not the only measure. That's very for not only for Sadia, for all the
quality of truth that requires absolute
knowledge. There's a unique quality of knowledge. The first for certainty is not enough. It's necessary condition, but it's not enough. It's not a sufficient condition because you need to know what you're knowing.
Right.
Which is the what we talk about when we say justified, right?
So it is a
belief.
It's a privileged relationship between the knowing and the known.
Yeah, we could you that's one way of formulating it. He definitely says something like that, and he just gives the definition of knowledge. And yeah, this is a Greek. The general again, tradition, the medieval, the old tradition of philosophy, almost all of it, of course, is always assumes that knowledge is not only measured in degrees of certainty. They would put all of the question of degrees of certainty into the question of belief or opinion. So how much sure you of this belief, that's the question, and certainty is important. But true certainty really, or true knowledge really only comes from knowing that it's such, and it must be such. In other words, yeah, you could talk about it as a relationship, but that's already a certain theory, which you might have, and how that relationship works. You get into different discussions, but the basic point is agreed upon for him also. So therefore, I don't know if hearing God saying, the soul is such, gives you knowledge. It definitely gives you certainty, but it doesn't really give you knowledge. And that is sort of the state in which he finds himself, because he believes that God told him, or told someone else that told him, which is more or less the same. Slightly less, but it's more or less the same category. And still he doesn't have knowledge, which means two problems. There's one, that he doesn't know, which is a problem for him, and two, is that he cannot prove it to anyone else, right?
There is a way out, though, which is that for Sadhya, the way that God would convey it would be in a way that would establish the relationship between.
Well, God can teach you. No, that there's a way. That's something that people like the Rambam play with sometimes, and other people. I don't think so. I don't know. I have to read more of what he says about prophecy. I don't know. I'm not sure. Actually, not sure. I don't think that it's a real big question, even for the Rambam and people like that, if that is really possible or what that would mean. Because one way of saying it would just be that God teaches you proofs. Because God could be your philosophy professor. That would be all nice, but no point of being God. But why not? Since he's probably the smartest philosopher, he might as well be the best philosophy teacher. They do. This is very important. That's why I keep on saying this. In general, whenever we talk about this discussion of the two kinds of truth, in other words, the taklid versus atakad, whatever the Arabic terms are, taklid meaning knowledge from tradition. If you read Chavos Halvavos, Shara Yichud is 100% sadhya in this sense, and talks about the obligation to move from belief to knowledge, and as in a religious sense, because you don't really know God otherwise. That is all based on this, and that's why I gave a whole bunch of classes on the Chavos Halvavos, and in this context, because people are very confused. People think the Chavos Halvavos is after certainty, but he's not. He's after knowledge, and that's why the Chassidim are all confused. Well, why is this guy going around finding proofs for God's existence? Aren't you all good Jews that believe in God? Like, yeah, but you believing is not enough. So it's very big confusion, because we tend to associate the most full knowledge as the most certain knowledge, and that's not enough for them. But what were you saying? So therefore, for Rav Sadia and for the Chavos Halvavos, there is in general. They don't have. That's why I'm saying there's only one kind of knowledge really, which is this. It has this levels of opinion and knowledge, but there's no kind of knowledge. No magic knowledge. There's no knowledge that sort of shortcuts the process of learning. Which this is his language. There's no created thing that can know without the time it takes to learn, or have the causal way of knowing, which is also a causal process for the human being, meaning you have to go through all the process of proofs, right? That's really why this is part of why the Rambam and people like him were very convinced that the knowledge is also the ultimate moral development, right? Or ethical development. Moral is a bad word, also a modern word, which nobody knows what it means. But ethical development in the sense of human.
Moral,
no. Well, no, okay. You have to read. I was listening to your friend, which explains that this is a word that was made up. What's his name? Yeah. Point is, but they would say the word human perfection or excellence, right? Or aret, which is what ethics translates in Greek. And meaning to say that the human tachlis, the sea, right? The human is to know, and therefore what I'm saying is that therefore it's not, you can't separate certain knowledge or true knowledge from the fullest development of a human being, and therefore if there are developments which are prior to that, then there's no way to dump that either. In other sense, if you need leisure time, if you need to have enough leisure, both simply to sit down and learn, and both and more internally, right? You need to have good midas. You need to be able to, have a clear mind that wants the truth more than he wants to win the argument and so on. Otherwise, you're not going to ever get to the degree of knowing truth. Unlike when nowadays, when you tell this to people, they get very confused. The Rambam keeps on saying you're not going to be a philosopher unless you're ascetic, and nobody knows why that is, because they're very confused because they see as knowledge as some kind of disconnected thing from what it means to be a full human being. And then, well, why can't I just learn some proofs and I'll know it? But for them, there's no learning proofs without going through the whole process. And since that is just the ultimate level of being a human, you're not going to really be able to jump. You might be able to slightly jump. It's really possible, but in the full way, it's not possible to, just like it's not possible to build the second floor before the first floor. It's just like not possible to have, same way it's not possible to have. No, that's not the moral, that's not like an idea that God hates you if you're not a good person.
In a moral sense, I'm saying appropriate.
Yeah, it's like you can't,
right?
like you can't understand the second grade math before you can understand the first grade. It's really analogous to that. And since math is only level 14 in the development of a human being, you need to be up to level 12 and 13. Otherwise, you're going to be very confused, and you're not really going to get it. And since level 12 is basically don't steal and so on. And of course, okay, there's more to this, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just sort of reconstructing the old way of thinking.
Rambam, let's say, account for acting in violation of one's beliefs or the truths that one knows.
He doesn't. This is he doesn't really think that it happens. I don't know what the Rambam himself would say, but I have to ask my friend.
So what we
That's the quote. That's called the question of no. That's known that's known as the problem of weakness of the will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the general philosophers don't really like that to exist. In general, they believe that if you're making a mistake, it's because you're missing knowledge. That's Plato sometimes disagreed with that, and sometimes yes, and then Aristotle has some kind of theory of it that I don't remember. Get said, but I think that's another thing which I hate, because I really don't believe that human beings work like this, and I think that even if it's a problem, it's a small problem.
Or that they act in violation of what the knowledge.
Yeah. I don't think that's really how it works. I just think that we're very confused about what knowledge is. It has to do with this whole thing. Okay, I don't know why this is not a class about this. I think that this whole Musar language of your head knows and your heart doesn't know, that's
we would have to establish
that
that's impossible. Meaning that it's impossible to act not in accordance with one's beliefs. Right? It is a prerequisite.
Yeah, that's simple to say. Like Socrates says, that doesn't make sense. But that's even not really coherent to even say. Like I think this is good and I don't think it's good. That you have to remember that. That's what Socrates said. That doesn't make sense.
I can understand the two marshmallows tomorrow, one marshmallow today. Example with perfect certainty, right?
No, wait a second. One second. I'm flying away. We shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
We shouldn't do this. Be disciplined. Okay. Anyways, no, I think that this, just to be clear, this whole language of my head knows and my heart doesn't is a very modern language, and if you read Musar Sfarim, you only find them in very late Sfarim, and that's a good sign that it's false, like everything else. Well, not that it's false. That's not necessary. That's not the only way to think, and I don't think it's a good way to think. I think that leads to a lot of nonsense. Of course, there's reasons for people to think that, but I don't really think that humans work that way. Okay, but that's another whole point. In any case, this is the basic thing. So this is how human knowledge works. And of course, like I said, it has a lot of ethical component to it because it's really part of the development of the full human. You can't really separate it, since that's the definition of knowledge. Also, but there's no shortcuts. Now, in other words, it'd make about as much sense for someone to know things without this as for someone to suddenly wake up being a tzaddik. To have normal people sort of like ice cream even when it's not good for them, and you would sort of wake up and not have that be true for you, and that's very not probable to happen. It might happen. God can do anything, so all the from people will always leave place for God to do almost anything. The Rambam doesn't leave room for God to do anything. Very explicitly believes that you cannot be a prophet if he thinks that the preparatory work for prophecy or for knowledge are necessary but not sufficient. So you definitely there's no way that God will give prophecy to you if you didn't go through the process, which basically naturalizes prophecy, right? It says whatever it is, it's some level of knowledge. He does think that God, if he wants, can make you not know even after that, but that's very simple because you might just die before you. It's not even really a weird thing to say. But he does have. But let me get back to where we really are. There might be, and this Kuzri definitely works like this, and the Hotel seems to have room for it. And the Rambam sometimes has room for it when it talks about prophecy in certain ways, and depending on how you interpret it, there might be, like you said, there might be a way for knowledge to be affected, true knowledge to be affected in a sort of magic way, in a sort of shortcut way. And then it wouldn't really be human knowledge. It would be some different.
Have to change the quality of the knowledge.
Yeah, right. It has to be still knowledge. In other words, like you would say, that whatever gives, like, that's why they did this language, like precisely this language, or like the active intellect, which is what basically gives all knowledge, or all forms form, and knowledge a specific form, or even maybe only knowledge. It's not a discussion. But point is, maybe that could just directly influence you, and therefore you just know everything by yourself, without going through the long process of discovery. Yeah, that's a sort of a possibility, but also, like you said, it doesn't really change the quality of knowledge. It does change the way to get to it. It does change the way of. In some sense, it does. In other words, it does, in some sense, change the nature of knowledge. Because if the nature of knowledge is you must do, premise A, premise B, and then you get to conclusion C, and that might be true in the more general sense, even for moral development and so on.
That's
then,
a very deterministic nature.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
The world is the causal world. There's no jumps in causality.
That's assuming that there's a specific causal process for truth, and that God can't provide an
Generally don't think that God can do that.
Okay.
The Rambam then generally doesn't think that God does that. He thinks that if to assume that God will do that make God into a crazy thing, and that's not the kind of God he wants, or thinks exists. Right? Want is the wrong word, because obviously looking around the world, you see everything else works very ordered. Okay. Yeah. But there might be space for that. Sometimes they have space for that, and even that. Yeah, you can think about it, but I don't know how much it would change the quality of knowledge. Because, like, for example, you could think of it as someone being born, for example, in a slightly higher state, right? So, for example, if you're born with a natural talent for music, then you might be able to skip some steps in your music lessons, just because some people have natural tendencies to understanding things, or it's very not clear what exactly that would mean for philosophically. What exactly does that really mean, that you were born a musician? Not really. Even that person sort of needs to practice. Might need to practice a little less, and there might be actual things that it's actually hurting him. And you go to a good teacher and he tells you forget everything you think you know and start from fresh. And he's not taking away your natural talent. He's just taking away, just clarifying, right, or how it's expressed. So that kind of thing there's no reason to believe that that's not true. What they would call a disposition, right? You could have a disposition which leads you naturally to be closer, and some people might just have a disposition that makes them never going to be there. That's the next part of the Moira that I have to teach next week. It talks about this. For disposition. Right, because it's a very problematic thing. But it seems it's problematic to talk about it as if it determines too much, because it doesn't. It mostly doesn't determine, and like I said, it doesn't take away the necessity of work, or the necessity of the knowledge, or whatever level you're talking about, to be achieved through the basic cause and effect. In other words, it's not a miracle. Not a miracle in the real sense. Not a miracle in the sense of jumping levels of causality. It just might might be a different kind of potentiality. It might be a different kind of. Might start in a different place, so to speak, somewhat, or be able to go through the steps quicker, something like that. There would still be a process. No, there would still be work to do. Okay. That's
none of these theories
that's just
necessarily alter the quality of this truth knowledge.
Right. They don't. That's what I'm trying to get. They don't. They don't. They don't. The idea of there being some kind of other knowledge. Well, this is the definition of divine knowledge, but the idea of there being some other kind of knowledge, like mystical knowledge or intuitive knowledge or magic knowledge, whatever. I call it magic because nobody knows what it is. I just use that as a derogatory term. Doesn't mean anything when I say magic. That's something that the Shem definitely don't assume. Besides for the Kizri, which tries to get at that. You have the Sufi ideas of taste and the third eye and all kinds of words like that. And in general, they don't have that. So and it's very popular nowadays to talk about things like that in a very confused way, because even if you want to have that, you have to clearly define what it means and distinguish it from other kind of things. In which case, you at least show how weird what you believe is.
Right, Aristotle had like this
No,
It says, right,
they are.
if I know that there's going to be a war tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
No, I don't think that's true because if there's Aristotle even wrote a book about prophecy and about dreams and stuff like that, he wasn't entirely so sure that there isn't ways of getting knowledge that are not naturalistic in this way.
No, I'm saying like the Aristotle. No.
I understand what you're talking about, but no, I know what you're trying to say, but it's not really correct because I mean what I mean to say is people you often talk about emunah pshuta or by a simple thing. I don't know exactly what they mean by that, and all kinds of talk of natural knowledge of God or and sort of knowing things in a direct way, which doesn't need proof, and they sort of seem like they see this whole language of seeking proof and discursive knowledge as just like one way of knowing, and like nowadays we talk about different intelligences, yeah, and so on, and that for the most part I think that's nonsense. You're just talking about biases most of the time. Now there might be such a thing, but then what I always say is that there's no reason to believe. There's no reason to believe. What I generally think, okay, I don't know why I'm talking about this. Always talk about this, but I don't see any reason to believe that if there is such knowledge that it's more accessible than any other one. In other words, just like, and this is important for me, just like discursive, intellectual knowledge is a lot of work, and there's a lot of biases. In other words, there's a lot of so we could, if you want, like more imaginary language, would say there's a lot of klipot, right? There's a lot of false knowledges bothering you, but until you get to the correct knowledge, you can make a lot of mistakes. That's definitely true for intuitive knowledge too. So there's not actually easier, or not. It's not an easier way. There's not more certainty in that way, and actually all the mystics agree with this because they all talk about, the effort and the things trying different beings that are going to mislead you and so on. Then you need to do a lot of work, whether it's asceticism or whether it's mitzvahs or whatever it is, to get to the correct intuitive knowledge. So this thing that people seem to see, well, the Rambam's way is very hard because you need to learn all this philosophy. So I'm just going to be Chassidishid. Chassidus seems to be very easy because Baal Shem Tov says that every Jew knows God. Well, Baal Shem Tov says that to make you feel good. That's true. The Rambam also is not against making Jews feel good. That's always a good thing. But of course, if you really ask Baal Shem Tov, he will tell you, well, no, really knowing God, you need to, you need to fast, whatever. You need to do a lot of work, and you need to. There's ways of discernment in that too. What is right and what is wrong, and maybe there are different ways. Maybe they just boil down to the same thing. In other words, you're not making life easier for you. That's one very important thing. So, if anyone talks to you about intuitive knowledge, you have to ask them what their criteria, right? How do you discern? How do you know that it's not a demon, like Descartes said, And there's definitely real demons if you believe in that. Right. So you really have to figure out. Then even more importantly, have to figure out if it's not a demon misleading you. Okay. Right. So anyways, back to where we are. Now, that was all preparatory stuff. Now, this is the simple story. Now I want to complicate it. Because when you come to Mamravov, for example, which is where we are supposedly, this is all Perish on this text. We're like 3 lines in. If you come to the 6th Ma'amar and the Mitzvah, so you see him sort of applying the same strategy, right? There are things that we know by tradition, by testimony, by prophecy, and now we need to prove them. Now you start seeing, and actually you see it in the earlier ones also, but it's very clear here in some different ways, you start seeing that there are actually different criteria for what we need to know, for what we need to make the tradition true, for the testimony true, and then what we need when we're doing independent research, so to speak. In other words, the traditional, I don't know, the word tradition is not serving me well here. The Torah, you could say something like this. The Torah, the religion needs certain facts or certain stories about the soul to be true in order to work, at least in order for certain parts of religion to work. And those are not the same concerns that you would have if you're just being a scientist wanting to understand what the soul is. Of course, they're connected, but they're not going to have the same criteria. What do I mean? And this is important. What do I mean is, this is, if you read what he says something like this. Did we go through this ever? I don't remember the 6 things that he says the soul is. Maybe we did. The basic thing is that the Torah needs a person, okay, which is the soul of a person, which means the life of him. I don't know if we did this part too ever. Difference in soul and life and mind and all of that. Okay, whatever it is. That this thing called a person, which we call nefesh adam, it needs to be created, but that's really a different concern that belongs to the concern of question of creation. It needs to be something that continues to survive. Both two things. There need to be something that it endures while a person is alive and after he's alive, and into a next life. That's for him what it needs to be. You could give different criteria for. You have a different version of understanding of what the Chimmer says, but this is his version of understanding. His version of understanding is that the Torah says that the soul is created. Okay, that's again not really our subject right here, although it makes a big difference. But it's not really our subject. The soul is created and inserted, so to speak, or connected with the body at the moment of birth, basically, and then endures while the person is alive. And it's
Not if it could last on a machine.
well, one second. We'll talk about how it lasts. And it endures while you're alive. It's basically what accumulates, zchuyot v'chavot, right? It's what accumulates good things and bad things, things that everything that a person does and knows, and then is separated, leaves the body, and still endures in some way, not in the same way, obviously, because it's not in the body, and can get back into the body another time for what he understands as tchias hamesim, and the ultimate reward and punishment for things, which is for him, and which is also what really Chazal say.
Which is necessary for theocentric or
this is necessary for firstly for him. This is what the Torah says, so it's necessary because the Torah needs to be true,
okay.
And we assume we don't have a good reason to assume. Otherwise, we assume that what it says is literally true.
Where does he find this necessity?
One second. Did we go through this already? He assumes number one again. You have to go through the next few moments to get to the details of all these things, because this really moves us till the end of the book almost.
The Quran didn't believe it.
Well, side no, but he's not a kid. Well, the
Because Chazal have to be speaking.
one second. Yeah, of course this is Chazal.
So not because of the Torah.
Yeah. The Chazal as they interpreted the Torah.
Okay.
That's for him the tradition, of course. Tradition, he says explicitly. Tradition means rabbinic tradition. It means what the rabbi said, the Pusik says, right? And he believes most of the time that what they say is really what it says. But that's another whole part of the thing. But yeah, but I'm not interested in so much in this. This is an interesting question also. For him now, this must be true. Number one, just for the text to be true. And again, unless we have a good reason to assume that it's not literally true, we're going to assume that it's literally true. But it's also important for more reasons than that. That's important to realize. And I don't know if he says it right here. You have to read further. Where's my minutes for that? I don't even see it. It's this. If you read further, you'll realize it's important mostly for schar va'anish to work. Okay, and the basic reasoning behind this, and this is how he understands it. He definitely understands it. Is that schar va'anish don't entirely work in this world. He talks about the Quran, by the way, so it doesn't seem to work. This is famous problem of theodicy, right? There's not perceived. There's really injustice. And the answer is he definitely believes that the answer is that this is not the full story, and there's a balancing of the accounts to be had after this life, mostly in the next in next physical
life.
Yes, another physical life. That's why it's important. So that's why it's important. That's what I was getting to. It's not only important because we need the Torah to be true, which is whatever, but it's also important for what we call Ikrei Hadas, right? It's also important. It's a load bearing feature of the theology that he has, which it says, at least of the ethical part. It tells people to do certain things because that will make their souls good. That will then give them reward, and that all of that can't work if there's no soul, or if there's no enduring soul, or if there's no soul that exists after death, and so on. Now, this is what he needs. This is how when he goes shopping for theory of the soul, he's going with this shopping list in hand. I need something that allows these facts to be true. And very interestingly, for the most part, he doesn't find the something in the text that he's in the tradition. He is going to claim that he finds them, but mostly that's not really when he presents.
He finds it in the text. He doesn't find it to be a problem of self-reference. He doesn't see that.
No, that's not a problem. Again, there's two sources. There are two independent sources of truth. What I'm saying is when he presents what the text says, what the tradition says, what God told us. That's how he presents it. What God told us. It doesn't say God told us the soul is made out of fire or whatever, and therefore it endures. He says
made out of fire and it's the rest of the system.
That would be fine, because then he would need to.
What would he?
No, that
would
would.
Find in the text that would be useful. It would be self-supporting.
What do you mean? If God told us that this hole is made out of purple elephants, then
Right.
then we would have to go around and find out if that's true. There's no problem.
But investigation would not be within the text itself.
No, exactly. These are really two
proofs from the tradition itself.
No, he wouldn't.
Oh,
Not proofs. I'm not talking about proofs. I'm talking about hodaot, right? Just even knowing what the text says. The text doesn't say everything, right? The text doesn't need to say everything.
Right.
There's some things that it leaves open, right?
It could be implied.
Right. He does think that their text seems to say something, but that's not how he frames it, at least. And I think that this is important. At least that's what I want to understand. The text for him, the text in the sense of the tradition, like you were saying, the text in, at least, the Gemara text, the Mishnah at least, it doesn't quote the Mishnah, but the Mishnah's understanding, isn't coming to say, his story, in other words, his story is a weird, what I'm really getting at, if you read this shah, you'll see, and you should, that he doesn't really organize it in the correct way, in my opinion. Because generally he would do something like this. God told us that the world is created, so let's go ahead and check if the world is created. That's very reasonable. So there's two sources of truth. We got this one, now we have to check the other one. Which the whole point of the other one is to check. Okay. God told us that that there's one God, now let's go out and check if there's really only one God, and so on. That's there you get into self-reference. But anyways. The first one to notice that was very late, so that's an interesting problem. But anyways, but he doesn't do that here. In other words, he doesn't do God told us the soul is made is such and such a kind of being, and therefore let's go out and check that. He says God told us the soul endures and has reward and punishment, so let's go check out what the soul is, so we can make this work. Right. So this is really, you understand that and then he does say, well, that I found a pustik that shows me that the soul is like this, but it's backwards. And then you could always say that it's just editorial concerns and so on, but I think that this is important because it's actually, there's other fashion that say this explicitly, not in his shit, but they explicitly say this, that what the soul is or what kind of thing the soul is, with the psychology, right? The knowledge of the soul is not a basic principle of religion, not a principle of Jewish religion.
In the text in terms of the mechanical detail.
Right, he's going to find text because why not? Because there's text, but his story isn't that what the text tells us this fact about what the soul is, and there we got his story is this text tells us with this what the soul does or happens to it, and now we have to have a theory that allows that to happen, right? So there's really two things, there's 2 points that I'm showing you here.
And I guess the text can either support this theory or will support
Right. He's going to claim that the text supports the theory, which I'm not sure how seriously he thinks the truth is. I never know how seriously.
For him, as opposed to Rambam, the moment of interpretation, Rambam wants to define as much as possible prior to the text, and then and then deploys interpretation.
In some ways, no. I'm not going to get to. No, we can't get into this. Okay. There's the difference in the Rambam.
Right.
He has a simple understanding. His thing is simpler. No, the Rambam is more complicated because the Rambam has a text as part of his philosophy, so it's different. Because the Rambam also has theories for why we have to tell people certain things.
Right. No.
That makes everything complicated.
My point is very narrow. It's just that for Sadia, he's using the text. His moment of interpretation, let's say, would be when I discovered the facts of the tradition, the result that applies by those facts, and then the mechanics I find elsewhere, and then interpret tradition.
Not for everything else. Not for everything else. And I think I don't know. Let's not get that. I think that there's 2 reasons for this really here. I think that one. I wanted to say something else. One reason is. The first reason, I wanted to say another reason that I just forgot. There's 2 reasons why it works like this. One is that, like I'm saying, the what kind of thing the soul is not a principle of religion, and you could see that, for example, in the Rambam also. This kind of reality, because the Rambam wrote his famous list of principles of the Torah, and he doesn't say the soul is such and such. He does include a bunch of things that happen to the soul, but it doesn't tell you what the soul is. Right, so there's facts about God. God is such and such. That's first 5 ikrim. You got punishment. That is ikr. But the soul is such and such. That is not ikr. Of course, he does metaphysically. It's ikr because it underlies what can happen to it. But he doesn't. He skips that. And there's really more reasons why the Rambam does that. But one of the basic reasons is because that's not really. It's not. You go around asking a Jew what he believes. He's not going to go tell us. Well, he believed the soul to be something like this, unless you're the Babbache, which is a different version of Judaism. But normative Judaism doesn't have what the soul is as a basic principle Although, of course, for certain basic principles to work, we need that. That is one important thing about this. I had another thing and I wrote it down and I forgot what it was, but that's what happens when we get off track. But where did I want to go with this? What I wanted to say is the more interesting thing to me. That's like one basic way of saying it. The more interesting thing for me is that means that there are different demands here, really, and we have to remember this, and this makes a big difference. In other words, what we religiously need is not the same as what we scientifically need or what we philosophically need. And this is also somewhat different than like the existence of God. The existence of God, the religious point is answering basically the same point, the same question as a philosophical point, right? Philosophers want to know how the world started, or something like that, and there's a answer to that you get to in the philosophical way. There's an answer to that you might get in the revelation way or whatever, but it's asking the same question. When you talk about the soul, they're not even asking the same question, because the religious person really wants punishment, reward. He wants some person that he could punish.
Satisfy the criteria of
right?
theology.
Yeah, and he's not really asking the question of what the soul is. He doesn't really worry about that too much. While the philosopher just going to do something very different. He's going to say what kind of thing is the soul, and so on. In a certain sense, it's interchangeable. That's what I'm getting at. You can't. What kind of thing God is less interchangeable. Of course, it is also less interchangeable than what kind of thing the soul is. You can have a lot of theories of the soul that might end up giving a very different flavor to the story that we tell about. The soul goes to Gehenna and alive and death and whatever story we tell, but it's going to have very different criteria for what kind of thing we're looking for, even. And the second thing that I wanted to say, this is also important for him. And another way of saying it, that's what I meant by the second way, is that he also doesn't really think, and this is important, it shows us also, it's another aspect in the same thing, he doesn't think that he needs to prove that the soul gets punished or rewarded. Because it's not after that. He just explain how it's possible, right? Like we discussed last time, or whenever it was, that for him there are some things that are both, traditionally, religiously necessary and reasonably, rationally necessary. They must be so. And then there are some things in which revelation might reveal facts which need to be possible. They can't be impossible. They can't be, right? But they must not be. They don't have to be always necessarily logical. In other words, doesn't have to be proof that it's such. You need to get enough close that it's possible. That it shouldn't be contradicted by right. It's not contradicted by reason, not contradicted by what we know about the world. But he has a lot of room, both in mitzvahs and in metaphysics, for the Torah to tell us things that we have no way of knowing, and maybe even in principle no way of knowing rationally, and that's fine with him. The Rambam is not fine with that, but he is fine with this. That's an example of him being more religious than the Rambam, lesser. And therefore the soul is an example of this, because he's never going to find you a proof for K'esam. There's like weird proofs in the Gemara, but there are proofs for God's ability to do it. They're not really proofs for it happening. At least that's how I would understand it. And it's very hard to prove the future, or at least they understand these things as sort of things that I'm not really sure, but he does, for example, Bias HaMashiach and Old Schar Va'onesh even, he doesn't seem to think that there's a reason, a logical proof for it. He just thinks that he needs to make it possible. That's a big difference. And the Rambam's theory is going to be very different. The Rambam's theory definitely is that at the end of the day, whatever he thinks really Schar Va'onesh is, which he doesn't tell anyone ever, is necessarily true. In other words, he can tell you the mechanism of it all the way. If Sadigun doesn't really even tell the mechanism all the way, he might hypothesize what the mechanism might be, but it doesn't really show it to be that way. He just might show it the basic theory that it's based on to be more plausible than other theories, and that's enough for him.
But it doesn't have like an epistemic quality to it.
Right, so you're not going to have knowledge of this in the end. You're not going to be able to get knowledge of this, and therefore, some part of it, yes, right? Like what the soul is, he's going to prove, but not that the soul is resurrected, for example. That you can only religiously believe. You cannot. Right. That's why, and the Rambam also has, we discussed this. Did we discuss this? Yeah. The Rambam also has things that are like this, but he definitely, in the end, it's not clear that he thinks that those things are true. But Rav Sadigon has things like this, and he definitely does think that they're true, or at least definitely says that they're true, and he doesn't have a problem with them not being accessible to reason by itself. Yeah, that's a big difference. And therefore, for example, this is another, going back to, if you think about the Chavos Halvavos, for example, if you read Shara Yichud, the Shara Yichud is not going to be interested in proving that there's this Charva Einish, which is a very nice way of showing that Shara Yichud is not really about what people think it is, which is apologetics. Because if you read the Chavos Halvavos, he's very interested in proving God's existence and his oneness and everything there is to know about God. And because he thinks that, the most important thing.
That's not apologetics.
No, its point is not apologetics. He explicitly disambiguates himself from apologetics in the Chosel, as you'll see. He says, well, there's people that have worked on apologetics, like Rav Sadigan, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in
simply moving from doxa to epistemology.
Yeah, in other words, as part of Chavot Halavot, as part of the duties of the heart, because he wants internal worship. He wants the person's soul and the person's internal sense of person to be connected with God, to be worshiping God. And for him, the only way for this, the first thing is to know God. And the last thing, but at least the first thing. And therefore, you need to actually know him. You can't just go around saying that's worthless. But he's not there to prove Yiddishkeit is true. That's totally not his concern, and he might not even care about it. Because that's not part of Chavos Halvavos. This is important for me. To believe that Mashiach will come is not part of Chavos Halvavos.
Maybe truth is necessary as an auxiliary thing, simply because we need to attain these things by way of epistema. Right?
No, but the to be a Ovid Hashem for the Chavos Halvavos, for example, which means you need to know God, doesn't mean knowledge of God. Yes, and you don't need to have knowledge of Tchias HaMaaseh for him. He might not even, I don't know what he believes, but it's not important.
He doesn't really care.
In order to be a good Ovid Hashem, but Mekayim Chavos Halvavos, Tchias HaMaaseh is not part of that. Why? Because, like I've said, and same thing, he explicitly says that all mitzvahs shemiyas are not really part of that. He says Chavos Halvavos is kulei mitzvahs sechlis.
He never makes any of these principles into like teleological beliefs. Like I believing in Tchias HaMaaseh is a certain kind of belief about
the end
project.
Yeah, the Rambam one does that, but then you end up ruining Tchias HaMaaseh. That's the problem. They don't want to do this. And the Tzaddik doesn't want to do it. What the Chavos Halvavos? No. So again, so let's just be clear. Just be clear very, very quickly. And this is just arguing with a bunch of people in my mind, so you have to always keep track of that. If you want to have contemporary Chavos Halvavos kind of people that are attracted to internal worship or to thought, Jewish thought, and so on, at least in the Haredi, generally in the Jewish world, will sort of give equal time to the existence of God than to the Mashiach or something like that. If you we discussed this already once, and they would say, well, since we want to have some sort of, we want to internalize, the truth of the Torah and so on, in some level at least, everyone that's trying to do something like this, whether it's through proof or through some Torah, whatever. So we want to know, what is this Tchias HaMaaseh thing? It's important. It's from the Ikra Adas. But that's a mistake. At least for the Chavos Halvavos, it's a mistake. And for the Chavos Halvavos, the reason it's a mistake, and for the Ram also, but in a different way, it's a mistake because that is not a knowledgeable, knowable thing. We believe it and it's important because otherwise you might not be afraid of sinning, and therefore you need whatever. It's true, but it's not important. It's not something that you're going to be able to prove, and therefore it's totally not something that you should be worried about. And the Chavos Halvavos definitely does not talk about this. Some parts, he never. I don't think he ever talks about. He's definitely not in Shara Yichud. I don't remember from other places he does have some discussions of certain subjects like this, but I don't think he's totally not interested in proving all the articles of faith in that sense. He's just interested in proving what can be known about God. That's what's interesting for him. He was looking for a relationship with God and he needs to have direct knowledge. But he's not interested in Tchias HaMaaseh, whatever. He's a good Jew, so he'll believe in it, but more than that, he doesn't think is important. And that's definitely that he's generally, the Chavos Halvavos is generally out of Sadiko and Talmud and theology. He's 100% or 99% student out of Sadiko, and maybe even somewhat more radical than him, but he's okay in these kind of things because he actually takes the Chavos Halvavos to be a way of life. Sadiko, and at the end of the day, you don't find him doing Chavos Halvavos. You don't find him doing this whole getting to knowledge thing. He just talks about it in his book. He thinks that it's important, but it's not like he doesn't make this into like an avodah. Most of the time he's just working on halacha and working on. This book is mostly framed as apologetic work, like the Chavos Halvavos himself says. It's not really framed as a Chavos Halvavos work, so that's very different. He doesn't talk about chassid, whatever. He's not into this Chavos Halvavos thing. But in general terms, the Chavos Halvavos accepts all of Sadigon's theology. So we can definitely assume that that's also why he thinks things like this. So that's two things. So there's two reasons why this is very different. One is that the criteria, the needs, the questions that the religion asks about the soul are not the questions that philosophers ask. They're not the same questions. They have very different needs. Their shopping list looks very different. And the second thing is that, at least according to Rav Sadigon's understanding, and this is sort of relates, I'll explain how it relates, that we're not really going to prove all the things that religion says about the soul. We're just going to make them possible. So what is this? Let me tell you what I think it is, and quickly, and what time it is. What it is basically is like this. And this is very important, and we see that the Sadigun also sort of arrives at something like this. It is like, in both ways, it leads to different kind of theories. So what this religious need is, like I said, for something to survive. So I'll give you a negative point and a positive point. Now, positively, we did this already. I don't even remember. Positively, it needs to have a personal identity. In other words, the person, whatever identifies the person as person, whatever makes me the same me as I was yesterday, whatever that is, that's exactly what I need to survive to the next life, to the next, not Gilgul, to the next Chisames, okay? And that's the thing that the soul has to carry. That's basically what he needs. Whatever it is, I don't care what it is. Whatever it is, for him, it's the body and the soul. But whatever it is, that's something, or maybe mostly the soul plus the body. Good question. But whatever it is, that's what we need. So we can't have. So this is a positive. In other words, it gives us a strong criteria for what we're looking for, because we can't go on and do things like the Rambam gets stuck in, or Mekabulim, different theories, which says things like, well, if you know the truth, you get assimilated to the truth, and therefore you will live forever in the truth, because then you lose personal identity, individual identity you lose, and possibly all personal identity. And in simple terms, there's ways of squaring all these circles. But you Pashtus, you lose the same identity continuing to exist. Or if you talk about the Gilgul, same thing. Sadigon thinks that the Gilgul is nuts, and one of the reasons why it's nuts.
What happens if you put a soul in the wrong body?
No, you can't put a soul in the wrong body. That doesn't make sense. We'll get to this. That's the kind of thing that you say when you're confused, according to him. It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. He talks about this. We're going to get to the physical. I'm not talking about that. I'm telling you why he has a physical account. That's true. But I'm telling you why he gets to that.
Is it done on physical terms? Or
One second. We're going to get to it. I'm just telling you why. He has actually a physical account of this all, in my opinion. Not according to some other people. According to me, he's definitely a physicalist. Or, I don't know, physicalist. He's a materialist in that sense. But what I'm saying is his needs. He's looking for something that preserves identity in a very simple sense. Whatever you think is you, that's what needs to continue going on. And this precludes a whole bunch of fancy theories. He doesn't even know about those theories, just so he doesn't quote them even. But I'm telling you, it precludes a whole bunch of fancy theories that you'd find in other people, including the Rambam and including the Mekabulim, which lose this. They have some fancy reason why it's not a problem, but it loses it. Right? If you believe a Gilgul, then you lose that. Because whatever I am, I'm not the same person in simple terms of whatever I was in the previous Gilgul or the next Gilgul, and you end up with very weird things. Or if you have some kind of assimilation into the soul of the world or whatever that is, then you also lose personal identity. And the Rambam, that's a problem. That's not what he's looking for. It also gives you a negative. And it also makes it somewhat easier to look for what we're looking for. So this is the way it makes it harder, because it precludes fancy theories. But in the same way, it makes it easier. Because like you say, we'd be pretty happy with the body existing. For example, just if this same person will just exist or something like that, that would be perfectly fine. We're just really stuck. The whole reason why we need a soul is really when a person is alive, we also need a soul in some sense. But mostly we just need it because of this weird thing called death, where it seems that bodies stop existing or stop continuing to exist in the same way that they existed before.
So identity to transcend death or something like that?
Yeah, but I'm saying that if you would, for example, if he would find, and he sort of finds something like that, if you would find some piece of bone that never dies, then you would be perfectly happy.
Without involving the soul necessarily as a...
Without involving any fancy souls. I'm using the word fancy, I don't know. Without involving any abstract souls. And he definitely actually doesn't end up with an abstract soul. Without involving anything that transcends what you can see or so on, like something like that. He does sort of transcend what you can see, but it doesn't transcend the category of body. So that's the negative aspect of this. That's how, in the way, it makes it easier. So we're not looking for In other words, just to, if you're, for example, just to clarify what I'm saying.
We could just call soul the aspect of a person that allows me to identify him as himself. Not in such a roundabout way.
Yeah, he doesn't. These are very.
Not that it has conceptual things, but in a physical way. Meaning it's physical.
Yeah, there's more to it than identity. I'll get to it, but the word identity is not a word that he uses at all. I'm the one that's putting it in, so that's not a bad thing to do. But we just need something to continue to exist, and then it has to be the thing. It has to be the thing that lets me be me. But doesn't need to be. It doesn't want to be and doesn't need to be. Well, both doesn't want to be something different than that or more complicated than that, and both doesn't need to be more complicated than that. That's all I'm saying. He would be very happy if you would find some, etzem luz that continues to survive death, and that's what chesed ma'asim, and that's what that's what endures, and in some way that would be the most important principle of the body, and therefore that gives you everything he needs. He doesn't need anything more than that. In other words, that's the soul. One second, he doesn't need. For example, he doesn't need to negate. He doesn't need dualism, and he doesn't have dualism actually. But he doesn't need it. More importantly, he's not interested in proving that there are things other than bodies, not in this state at least. He actually doesn't believe that. But he doesn't. I'm talking about what he doesn't need because of this. And again, because of this framing, that's why I think it connects. Because of this framing that he has, that he is not really here for the philosophical. If you're a philosopher, then you have a whole bunch of different problems that you have to solve, and then you need to figure out what the soul is on its own terms. But he's not a philosopher here. He only needs something to justify the possibility of chesed ma'asim happening and the person getting patched for what he did in this life. And for that, you don't want or need anything very metaphysical or anything very complicated. You just need this person, however, in whichever way, to survive death or to continue to survive, or there's to be something to punish and so on. That's all you need. Basically, for example, if you know some history, like the ancient Egyptian theories, old, archaic Egyptian theories, or the ancient archaic Greek theories of the soul would be perfectly enough for him. And he sort of ends up somewhere like that. So, or another way of saying this is that he ends up very close to the pshat of the Mikra and Chazal, which definitely don't have any abstract souls or souls that are very different from bodies and so on. So he ends up very close to there because he's having a very minimalistic demand for himself. Does that make sense? Not enough. So I'll tell you what is, yeah. His basic answer that he gets to after going through 6 or 7 or 11, as many as you have, depending on how you count, different theories of the soul, is that he ends up with saying, and this, if you read what he says in the 7th Shita Shvius, he says the soul is in Das Gimel, he says the soul is a thing like this. What is the essence of the soul? Is some kind of fine and transparent thing, as in the way of the heavenly spheres, and therefore receives light like the sphere receives light, maybe even more transparent in the sense of being able to receive light. That's what it means for them. Don't forget about earlier modern theories about light. That's what they thought, and therefore it's able to accept reason in some way, and that's all. And he says that the pasuk says compares the souls of the tzaddikim to stars, and that's literally true. It's made out of a similar kind of thing that stars are made out of. For him, stars are made out of some kind of
substance.
Well, it's knowledge bearing, but that's not the more important. That's what it's knowledge bearing, and also ethics bearing, and also midas bearing, and so on. Life story bearing, like we said, identity bearing, and all these things. But it's a substance, and if it's material substance, it's a different kind of material substance. Must be a more elevated kind of material substance than the things we have here, because those things don't survive, don't endure so much, and they're not smart. They don't bear, like you're saying, they don't have knowledge, they don't have wisdom, and so on. But the stars do have wisdom, and they're still physical or material. They're just made out of something more better, and shine. And that's what it is. And that's the soul, and therefore this is the thing that gets created when you were born, and then this is the thing that when you die it goes back to heaven, literally. Goes back to the heaven. If you made it dirty and sort of ruined it a little bit, because you're Yerusha, then you'll go in some lower, some kind of Gehenna kind of thing. But that's not the main place where you get to. It might even help you to make you clearer and cleaner if you read all these things, and then that's how it survives. He also thinks that it doesn't do anything, it doesn't have any actions, and it's not in a body because nothing that's not God can do anything without a body. But that it basically is a kind of body, just not a kind of body that does anything. In other words, yeah, we have to exactly define this. You have to know what kind of and but then when it comes back, that you're back the same exact person. And then he literally, for just to prove that he has a materialist theory, he literally has this question: so how does the soul go out of the body? And he says, well, God sends the angel to take it out, and he has green fire combined with blue fire and a sword, and it becomes afraid of it and jumps out of the body. And there's psukim that say this, and Amar Chazal, and then he goes, well, how could this be? We don't see it. We don't. You can be by a deathbed and don't see any soul jumping out. He says, well, that's simple because it's transparent.
The mouth also is transparent.
Oh, I guess he doesn't talk about that, but I guess, yeah. You might be able to see a malach actually. Yeah, you might actually be able to see a malach if you're a prophet. So it's not. Oh, but the soul, he seems to not be able to see, and he says he basically definitely says it's transparent. He gives an example, like if you have some very clear window and you see light going through it, you don't notice how thick the window is because it's transparent. So that's all. So the soul is a thing, and it goes into the body, and then it goes out, and then it goes around and hangs out somewhere in heaven until it comes back into the body and shines. Yeah. Okay, so that is the soul for him, and this is at least very close. We need to remember figure out exactly what the sort of basic metaphysical, like what kind of beings he has in mind for this to be. But it's definitely a material thing, and he definitely is a materialist. He definitely thinks that nothing besides for God is not material. He seems to think that even. I wonder what he says about malachim. I have to check. I don't remember now.
Definitely seems to have all sorts of fires going on. So
yeah, but I don't remember. Now that I'm thinking about it, he must talk about it. He must talk about it, and I don't remember what he says. And this people seem to be very worried about it. All kind of mefarshim that read this seem to be very confused by this, because they really want the soul to be not material, because they read different people that think that, but that's not what he thinks, and it's not only one. There were many people that thought that. I mean, he seems to definitely believe that the soul is material. Of course, material is a very complex thing to say, because for that to say that, you have to have a very fleshed out theory of what a body means and what are the conditions of being a body, and he doesn't have the standard Aristotelian theory of that. That's important to remember. He has the Kalam theory of that, which is a weird theory, right? Which is Etzev Mikra, and the Rambam complains that it's atomist, but the Rambam Sadi is definitely not an atomist. So exactly what his theory is a problem. If it would be atomist, then we would have a coherent theory, which you could read the Moed Nevochim Perek Ayin Aleph and elaborates that theory. And yeah, and he makes the Kalam theory.
There was a Greek guy who came up with
yeah, Democritus. But much later. This is much later. But the Rambam claims that the Kalam have an atomist theory, and therefore all the things they can say are consistent with that. If Sadia is definitely not an atomist, or denies that at least explicitly, at least the way he understands atomism, which is complicated. So there's all these broken telephones going on here. Which makes it very hard to figure out. If it would be an atomist, then we know, like the Stoics basically had a theory like this, that the soul is some kind of thing mixed in with the body and then can go out, and actually then don't really believe that the soul goes on to live, but with personal identity after death. But okay, but you could have a theory like that.
What, in a way where the soul doesn't relinquish its identity?
Yeah, I think that most materialists and atomists don't have a real soul that survives death. Sort of something going to be different in that way from them. So all these things makes it hard to like put them into an easy box. Trying to remember. But he defines it differently, because so for him just gonna say, and we'll try to read more clearly. For him, this is basic Kalam metaphysics. He thinks that everything in the world is divided into etzem v'mikra, right? Substance and accident, which is an Aristotelian concept, but his concept of substance is not Aristotelian, because Aristotle's substance at least includes form, and he doesn't Makoris form. And they don't have matter and forms. They have only substance and accident, and they have to push everything into that. And his big thing is that the soul is not an accident, which is how he understands the other atomist and materialist theories of the soul, which they say that the soul is not really a matter, is a matter, but is material, but is not. It's an accident or something else, right? And that he's that's definitely what general normal atomists would think. They basically deny the soul existing as a kind of thing. He doesn't want to have the soul existing as a substance, but he doesn't make it into a form. And for him, form is just another way of saying accident. So he definitely doesn't like that. So
Sadi doesn't like this.
Yeah, he doesn't believe in forms. He believes that form is an accident. This is the language that the Rambam at least describes to the Kalam. He says they believe that the natural form is an accident. So he can't have that. But he does have a material soul. That's important. And I think that I don't see the big problem with this. I think people nowadays go around saying that it's crazy because he never saw it. But that's not a proof, because there's many things that we don't see. And it's definitely, I don't know. Why wouldn't it be true? He does elevate it a lot. They have to remember, because I keep on saying that he's close to the Pshat, but that's not really. Because, for example, one of the things you might think if you read Pshat of Sefer Bereshis and of probably Menem with Chazal is that the soul is ear or breath. Right? V'hipavap of Nishmas Chaim doesn't mean a soul. Nishma means a breath, right? This word Neshama, soul, is just mistranslation. It just means God puts breath into this thing. Described it in an anthropomorphic way, blew breath into him. But the point is that whatever this difference between a dead person and a live person, they're going to Sefer Bereshis, is that a live person breathes, which is true. Dead people don't breathe. Of course, it's not clear that that's what makes a person a live person, but that's what it says. And definitely the way, the way in which it's described, and the way in which some ancient Greek philosophers, which are always our reference for organizing theories, definitely said this, and not so ancient also. The Stoics more or less said this, that the soul is breath, or the soul is ear, breath or ear, and pneuma. Yeah, he said that ecstasis is again because. He attacks this because for him, I'm not sure why he says it's not true, because then the soul would be.
He has an interesting thing here. He says
because then the soul would be wet and warm. Yeah, and that's not true, and it actually is true. So I'm not sure why I would say it's not true.
Well, for him, the soul's wet and warm.
The people that said this, they actually said, yeah, of course it is. Your breath, I mean, the soul, living people have more warmth and more wetness than dead people.
Right.
So it's actually a reasonable thing to say.
Right.
I don't know where he got this idea that it's not. I'm not even sure what he's saying.
Because people can be cold and dry sometimes.
Yeah, not entirely.
Right.
I mean, dead people are definitely more dry. I mean, I don't know what these things exactly mean for him. And in general, his whole list of opinions and arguments against them is very weak. Doesn't clarify exactly what he means or what he's trying to even argue. And he explicitly says that he's not doing a very precise job here, so it's hard to figure out. But I think,
like Galenian soul, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that what he doesn't like here is that it seems to be too lowly for him. He does want, again, he's a materialist because he doesn't have a concept of forms and so on. Right, he wants the soul to be as elevated as possible. And as possible, and not more than it's possible. Because he can't make it into God, because then it would ruin everything for him. He can't make it into something entirely abstract, because then it doesn't exist. Something like that. I think that's really what's underlying. Now I'm thinking this. What's underlying, really what he's not happy with all these theories of the soul being blood. Again, he quotes Anana saying that, and it's definitely what the Pusik seems to say in some places. And he says, well, that's just a metaphor, and whatever. Either you accept that or not. But why is he really bothered by this? He seems to really be bothered by this because that seems to... Because, like you said, probably Anan didn't really believe in the soul existing after death. I'm not sure what the Kerem actually believed. So they famously didn't believe in the Chesed, and the Kerem also not. Probably not, because it doesn't say. I don't know. We have to read. He probably talks about it further. Did the Kerem not believe in a separate soul? Yeah?
Not sure.
It is interesting because this also Karaite view of the soul. Karaite Insights. The Karaite Insights website says actually that
This is modern Karaites, or
I
is
guess
this
it's a guy writing
documentation?
in English. Yeah, problem. Life person dies. Yeah, they do. They do have a person survive death.
Okay, but they don't believe that
Um,
metaphysically, and
they
that's
also have
theologically.
Tchesa. No, they simply they do. This guy, I don't know who this guy right inside this guy is. Guy is. He does actually believe in this. The Tzaddukim famously didn't believe in Tchesa. According to Chazal, he's gonna go find out what they said. I don't know. I actually have a book of Karite, the Ikra Adas somewhere. And you could look what it says. I don't know where it is. What's this? Karite Creed. This is a more old book. And this says, I don't know, it's not so, I'm sure that the problem with Karum is that they're anarchists, everyone has his own pshat, so. They've got 6 tenets: divinity, messenger, prophecy, Moshe, the Torah, the holy site, I don't know, day of judgment. They do have a day of judgment, which is Chesamais, basically. Yeah, the soul will be returned to our former state. They do seem to believe in Chesamais, interestingly, and that's because of the Psikim and Daniel and so on. So yeah. No, they do have Chesamais. I'm sorry to tell you. Sorry to report, you're not going to get out of the becoming Kirui. You have to find a different Jewish sect to convert to if you don't want to believe it Chesamais. Yeah. But it seems that his problem is that it's like too low. He wants to elevate the soul very much. He likes that, but he doesn't want it and he can't because he doesn't really have a category in his ontology for it to be not material. So it stays material, just very fine material and transparent, all these kind of nice things about it, but not unmaterial.
Yeah. Similar to the celestial spheres.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the motivation.
Yeah, I think that it is, and I think that, and this is why this is very confusing to people because he is interested in him, and basically all of the Jewish tradition is interested in elevating the soul. And Chazal, and you have this famous Mama Chazal that the soul is similar to God, analogous to God in 5 ways, which is used by almost everyone for their own purposes. Like one of these Mama Chazal that there's a pshat for every school of thought. And other things like this. So this is a very interesting point in general. There's a lot of like things which work like this. Like let's make it great. Let's talk about how great and elevated and all kinds of superlatives like this is. But they don't actually give you like a definition of what that's supposed to mean. Or like, okay, so
they want it to be ontologically superior but not ontologically distinct.
No, they want it to be superior. Ontology is a fancy word. I don't know what this means. They don't know what it means. You understand? Like even about God, you get a lot of people misreading a lot of psikim and about the greatness of God. And they say, well, okay, so here there's there's saying that God is not a body and so on, but it's not really saying. They're just saying that God is very great or greater than all kind of bodies and so on. And that's very different from saying because you need to have. It's very different, and in some sense, and if you read like different people, a lot of like less philosophically accurate people don't care about philosophical accuracy doing this both about the soul, both about God, and they have like they want to be like impressed. I don't know how to define this. They want to have a very great story about it, like a good myth. Yeah, and it's a godless Hashem or godless Hanashama and so on. But they're not doing science. They're not trying to define their terms. I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah, they do.
Even the inability to describe God is not metaphysical. It's just because he's so great.
Yeah, I think exactly. That's Pshat Chazal also. And they don't say because he is not the kind of thing that shall be described. It's because he's amazing and whatever.
Right. How could you possibly?
And that's a good right, and so on. Right. And the same thing is going on for the soul. And if you read Kafsadigon, this is what I'm getting to.
We're told the same thing about many things. It's not understandable.
Which is true because this is the kind of this is rhetoric. This is for people need to hear that. For example, but I'm saying this for this reason because Rav Sadigan is very influential, and I'm presenting him, and when you read him, you find him saying these weirdest theories or strange, I don't know, weird strange to what you're used to. And if you read more Nevuchim, you find much more familiar theories, or at least much more familiar words, because he has although exactly figuring out his coherent system is famously impossible, but at least the language that he uses and the kind of things that he says get taken over by everyone in a closer way. And Rav Tzadok also is enormously influential. That's what you have to remember. And at least for the 100 years before the Rambam came around, people read him. Everyone was interested in knowing what God is and so on, which includes Chasidei Ashkenaz, which includes a lot of early Mekabulim, which includes and so on. But he is working both with different philosophical background, and he's also working, like I'm saying, a lot of them sort of take over a lot. He is interested in elevating things and making them great, but he doesn't seem to clarify so much of his philosophical terms, and therefore we end up with people like the Ramban, which I claim takes over a lot of his thoughts about the Sofan of Tzaddik, although he doesn't acknowledge it. I don't even know if he read him, so I can't tell you. And also seems to contradict himself. And I think that if you have Rav Tzaddik Gaon's coherent picture in mind, you might be able to make sense of it, although he would never agree to that, because all he takes is the greatness. The soul is, we believe in the soul as the greatest being, which Rav Tzaddik Gaon would agree to. But then it doesn't follow that we believe the soul not to be a physical being. That's two things. It could be the greatest physical being. That's fine. Rav Tzaddik Gaon believes that the Shechina is, you have to remember, Rav Tzaddik Gaon sees the Shechina as a physical being. That's really where I want to get to. And then anyways, okay, that's enough for now.
Like the Mekabulim?
No, you see the Mekabulim never. This is really my example, my prime example for this. But I'm giving very. No. Mekabulim have Shechina. The Mekabulim are Rambamists, 100%. Nothing is physical. Everything is metaphysical. They're Platonists. What?
Universally, all the Mekabulim are like this?
Yeah, all of them. I don't know what all of them. There's always one guy that ruins all these generalizations. Who asked that guy? Every generalization you do, there's always some chochem that ruins it. No, mainstream Kabbalah. Okay, I don't know. Mainstream Kabbalah, as represented by the Zohar, the Ramak, the Arizal. Those are the people that I can talk for. They are all definitely not corporealist in any sense. Not for anything. Not for a malach, not for a soul, not for gods, not for spheres, not for anything. There is no bodies in their system. Only in Olam Asiyah, like in this world. Everything else are not bodies. What they are, whatever. But they're not bodies. They're beings and stuff.
Okay,
levels of being.
Was manifestation in
No. Yeah, you could talk about that, but then that would not be the Shekhinah that they're caring about. That would be a separate, created thing. That would be totally a body, and they would be totally not interested. There's a whole controversy about Gilus Shekhinah. Yeah, no. Nothing. There's no incarnation in Kabbalah. No real incarnation. There's always one guy that ruins everything. But in general, the Kabbalim are total. They're Platonists. Platonists are even more into things being non-bodies than Aristotelians. You have to remember. They're things that are not even in bodies. They're not even forms of bodies ever. They're separate forms, and so on. So, why do I say they're Platonists? Yeah, there's another class where I do that. But, they're all definitely very philosophical in this sense. Very pure thought. Whereas Rav Tzaddik Gaon, which is one of the first people to talk about the concept of the Shekhinah, his Shekhinah is physical. Because for him the Shekhinah is Kavod Nivra. And Kavod Nivra means a created thing, literally created thing, because he has...
Shekhinah is one entity?
1 second. For him, he is the first one to make Shekhinah... why am I talking about this? Because I want to say a point, but I need to give so many basic pieces of information for this to make sense, and I'm just going to confuse everyone. But anyways, the Shekhinah is mentioned... let's just start right here. If Tzaddik Gaon took the word Shekhinah, which is mentioned in Chazal, and Chazal probably just means God. Which, in this sense, in other words, it's just a way of talking about God being present or something like that. But it doesn't, not a thing, not a essence. There's like one Mama Chazal that the Mekabulim quote, which says Amra Shechina Lefnei Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and doesn't actually exist. So, sadly, they don't have this. I think I never found it. I think they made it up or whatever. Maybe there's a Gersa somewhere. You never know. But the Rav Tzaddik Gaon was the first to use Shechina and to solve a big problem, because he's used the Shekhinah to solve the problem of seeing God. In other words, it solves both the problem of the Nevi'im, mostly Nevi'im talking in bodily terms, and they talk about seeing God in bodily terms, and the Bible often describing God as coming and going and so on. And part of Rav Tzaddik Gaon's solution for that, it says V'yad Hashem Sinai, says, well, that's not God, that's the Shekhinah, Malach Hashem. And Malach Hashem means the Shekhinah, means a created thing, some sort of light or some sort of cloud or some sort of ear. He gives these kinds of descriptions. in different ways in different places, but basically something that can be seen with basic same way you see anything else, and it's not God. It just he calls it something that signifies God. It's like God's sign or God's. Again, it goes back to what we discussed earlier. It's a miracle, really. It's something sent directly with God that shows you that God is speaking to you. For him, the point of Shekhinah is that the people speaking to God should know that it's God speaking to them. So we need a miracle for that. So this is sort of like a distinct miracle that shows you God is speaking. Then it gives you a picture. It might be a picture literally of a human. In other words, when Yechezkel says he saw a Merkava, it's literally true. He saw a Merkava. And that was a created thing that was not in his imagination. He didn't see it in his imagination. He saw it actually outside of outside of himself.
Like
As a apparition, like as a thing that can be seen, as a physical thing, basically. And sometimes he talks about it as always existing. Sometimes he talks about it being created at that time. It doesn't matter. These are details. But it's a physical thing, totally physical. Now again, for him, there's only two kinds of things. You have to remember, he has no grades of reality.
Physical and God.
There's only God and not God, or created and uncreated. There's only those two things. He's very against anything in between. Doesn't understand that, and he thinks that's illogical and so on. So there's only either you're created or you're not. Shekhinah is created, and why is it called God? Because it represents God. That's all. Now the Mekabilim take over this idea, but they're not happy with it. The Ramban is very famously not happy with it in Parshas Vayigash, because he said, well, then we're talking about a created thing, so that's like Avodah Zarah, that's like he sees this as problematic. It was coming to solve the problem of God being described in physical terms, but he's not happy with the solution because he thinks that it makes God into a physical thing. This question is confusing because I don't understand it. But anyways, the Mekabilim are not happy with this, and therefore try to. They don't hold like this. They hold that there might be such an aspect in the end, but that's not the Shekhinah that they care about. The Shekhinah they care about is literally an aspect of God or something like that. And of course, they sort of don't have the same dichotomic understanding of either you're God or you're not God. You can be God and not God at the same time sometimes. So, that's not accurate. I'm just saying this in very, very broad terms. Why did I say love this? Because this is another example where, especially if you read early Mekam, they're very influenced by Rav Sadigun's language and Rav Sadigun's way of talking about things. But for Rav Sadigun, this is very simple. Like we could talk about God, and also for Chassidei Ashkenaz, which take over a lot of his thoughts in slightly different ways. They would say we can imagine God, and it's permitted to imagine God in a physical form. Why not? As long as you know it's not God. It's a representation of God, which is fine. If you read Shirah Yichud, it says Adam chachancha v'lo yisicha, Adam chachancha v'lo yidaticha, and so on, which doesn't say it's a metaphor. It says we imagine you. It doesn't. We read it as a Rambam. If you read Anna's Meres, you'll see that you're confused when you read it. You think God says what the Rambam says. It's nothing what the Rambam says. It says God is seen as an old man and as a young man and so on. And these are all just seeing. They're not God. God Himself is the one, but you can see Him and you're allowed. You can imagine.
As a sign is not
a
problem.
Yes, 100%. And that's Sadigun's opinion, because Sadigun thinks that God Himself sends imagery to represent Him. And the Mekabilim are not happy with this because they're Rambamists, and they think then you would be referring to a representation and not to God. Then they want to refer to God. Therefore, they have to invent another category. And this is a confusion because people always forget that there's a whatever you want. Yeah, let's say I don't know. I hate this word. It's not true, but let's say the Mekabilim use this word, so it's their fault. Yeah, something in between God and creature and created. This is Hamilton's language, so I'm allowed to at least say it, although I don't like it. Why am I saying all of this? Because it's another example of where Rav Sadigun has a very simple theory. If you don't superimpose different demands on him, like we want God to be totally abstract, which is not a problem that he has, or we want even visions of God to be totally abstract, or not knowledge of God to be totally abstract. If you just we have a God, which is not embodied, but we see Him as a body, so therefore that's a seeing, that's not God. The end. And this seeing, of course, then he goes on to elevate the Shekhinah. You have to remember, he does think that this is amazing. When you see it, you're gonna, like Cheskel describes, you're gonna be impressed. You're gonna fall on the floor and so on. And not only because, well, this proves me this is God. It's fantastic. It's meant to apply it to the imagination. I mean, it's a good movie. It's meant to be a good movie, right? And then a lot of people take over this part. Understand? Like a lot of Mekabilim take over these kind of descriptions. Well, it's an amazing movie and so on, but they forget that for their system, that's not actually what's going on. He can do this because from this is physical. If you ask him, according to his mind, it's just a physical created thing, but it's amazing and it's there to amaze you and so on. But if you want amazement to be, if you want your being impressed to be something different than that, then you get very confused because you take over the being impressed without the basic theory, the simple theory that was behind it, and then you end up saying very confused things and nobody knows what you're saying.
But
So
in terms of Sadia's possible entities,
sure,
it's not so cluttered, right?
Yeah, he's very simple. His theory is actually very simple.
All sorts of quasi things, and
right.
Not only quasi things, but just things that seem to
it's very
borrow
simple
from different categories in terms of.
I'm not saying I don't know what they do. I'm not saying I don't know, but Sadigon, not only Makbulim, the Sadigon's theory and his worldview is very simple, and he thinks that it answers all the questions, and you have to. Of course, that's not true because the world is more complicated than he thinks, but at least when you take over these things, you'll see that it's very simple.
Let's get going.
Anyway, that's the story. I don't know why I said this. I think my mind is confusing everyone. But it's another example of this kind of thing happening where you got people taking over. Like I said, the soul is amazing, and then they associate that with their kind of amazing, which for the Rambam amazing can only mean not a body. But for him, amazing could just be amazing. Understand? The two definitions of amazing. And for regular people, amazing is just whatever you claim as amazing. And I think that amazingness is very important.
Sadia cannot exit the ordinary material, and for Rambam it must.
Right. And I think that amazingness is a very important feature, though. I do believe in the imagination being important and being amazed being important. But that's true for everyone. It's just
keen on that, right?
He is, but okay, right, as such. But of course, he's impressed by his thoughts. So you begin, in the end, he gets an abstract being impressed, but he's very impressed, and he does think that until that you should be impressed by imaginations. So yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important to have this part, but you have to remember that don't confuse your metaphysics because of that. That's all I'm saying. Okay.